Howdy, and welcome to Love After Divorce, the podcast for women who want to find a fantastic and long lasting relationship. This is the place for you if you're post divorce or post breakup and wondering how to find a partner you can't imagine living without. Right now, you may feel frustrated or even hopeless because of the way things have been going in your love life. Maybe you're beating yourself up for what happened in the past. Maybe you're dating somebody you know isn't the right match, or maybe you're feeling loads of anxiety because you think there are no good guys left. Perhaps you worry that you won't be able to see red flags and wonder if you'll make the same mistake again. So, right now, you may not be able to see a wonderful future. Right now, you may be thinking you can't have a love life do-over, and I'm here to tell you that it's possible. In the first two podcasts, I told my story, what happened in the 11 years between my first divorce and my third marriage. It was my do-over story. And today I'm going to tell you a story about one of my best friends, Mary, and her do-over. I got permission to tell her story. All the names have been changed, but the details are true. But before we get to the do-over, let's start with the ending of her marriage and what happened when she started dating. So Mary got divorced after being in a sexless marriage for about 15 years to a man who drank like a frat boy. Well, she wasn't having sex, but he was. He cheated repeatedly. She would say that he was always more interested in other women, usually younger, than he was in her. And during the divorce, she was a mess. She constantly worried about money while working on 2 master's degrees while raising 2 boys. She stayed separated and legally married for a number of years for a number of reasons. One was that she wanted to keep her health insurance coverage she had through her husband's full-time job as a prominent professor at the big university here in town. And if she stayed married, she was also eligible for a tuition discount for the master's degree she was working on. I remember that period really, really well. And I remember she walked on eggshells the whole time. She seemed so afraid of doing the wrong thing and pissing off her soon-to-be ex-husband. She was always worried about money and losing her health insurance and tuition benefits. She said she felt like he had her over a barrel during those years. She felt powerless and scared, and she was convinced that she would end up living in the streets eating cat food. And that would happen if she didn't go along with all of his shenanigans and threats. So she felt like she had to keep him happy. Otherwise, she'd be screwed. Well, during this time of separation, Mary started dating. The name of the first guy was Tom. In fact, before she met her Mr. Wonderful, Mary dated 3 different men, all named Tom. Let's start with Tom number 1. I like to call him the whiny ass baby man. Back when she was dating him, I thought, this guy peaked in high school, and I could not, for the life of me, understand why Mary would date a guy like that. The fact is, she liked a good project. He was a former Marine, had run his own successful construction company, but lost the business in a series of bad decisions. He'd been sexually abused as a kid, which left him broken and volatile. And he lived in a shack out in the woods and got high a lot. In fact, when she first met him, he was wearing an ankle monitor because of a DUI, and he only worked here and there. So money was always a big deal for him. Mary says that while they were dating, he often forgot his wallet. But he was attractive to Mary, and one reason is because he wanted her. Her first husband never seemed to have any real interest in her, but Tom was certainly interested in her mind and body. She says she would stay awake just to watch him while he was sleeping. She's like, he had skin like silk, and she loved that his shoulders were so much higher than hers as they lay on their sides in bed. And she loved the fact that he was tall enough to kiss her on top of her head. She's kind of tall. And the sex was great. After years of feeling unattractive and unwanted, she was finally with a guy who couldn't get enough of her. But throughout the relationship, Tom's moods were volatile. He got super angry at any perceived slight. Then, after 8 years of a shaky relationship, Tom said, I'm going to go work in another state. And then later, Mary found out that he was dating a woman when he moved. At some point, Tom moved back to the area where Mary lives, where we both live, and they started seeing each other again. But at that time, she had no idea there was another woman. And when Tom came back to town, Mary was dealing with something really, really challenging. Her ex-husband had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And by that point, Mary and her ex were on good terms. So she helped take care of him for 4 months until he passed away. Mary had invited her ex-husband and his girlfriend to move in so her sons could be close to him during his last days. After his death, Mary and her sons were devastated, and now she was the sole caregiver to 2 grieving sons. And while all of this was happening, there was the issue of her job. She worked so hard to get 2 master's degrees, only to end up commuting over a mountain, sometimes in the snow, to a job she hated. She felt totally stuck in her career and had to make decisions about what to do in the wake of her ex's death. So fast forward a few months. Mary's ex-husband had died and Tom was back in town. Mary and Tom would go for walks. And one of those walks was particularly strained and uncomfortable. They bickered and he told her how difficult it was for him to listen to her anxiety and grief. After the walk was over, Mary went to her car to drive home when Tom sauntered back toward her and said, hey, could I borrow $10,000? You see, he knew she'd gotten some life insurance money when her ex died. Mary said no. And so it became apparent to Mary that Tom was not the one, so she broke it off. So not long after that, Tom showed up at Mary's house to get a wheelbarrow he'd left in her garage. As she was pulling down the garage door, she offhandedly said, like, hey, keep in touch. And he said, oh, I don't think you want me to keep in touch. And Mary took the bait and said, okay, why don't I want you to keep in touch? And he said, well, because I'm engaged to a woman I met when I was away, and I just had a $10,000 ring designed for her. And that, my dears, put a fine point on the end of that relationship, at least in the physical sense. After that night, Mary spent lots of time trying to figure out how she ended up with a guy who wanted to borrow money from her to buy a ring for another woman. And FYI, it looks like the engagement to this other woman went sideways. We sometimes have Tom sightings here in town, and it looks like he's still not working much and still lives in a shack in the woods. So that's the story of Tom number 1. But that doesn't mean Mary was done dating men who were not what she was looking for. And that brings me to Tom number 2. Mary would say Tom number 2 looked great on paper. He'd lived abroad, had a master's degree, was former military, and worked as a consultant making big bucks. And before they met, she was excited. Their messaging and their phone banter was so fun. She was really looking forward to their first date. But when she met him for the first time, she really wasn't attracted to him physically. He looked nothing like his profile picture. And despite their talks about going on outdoor adventures, it became clear he was not up for strenuous activity. Mary hikes all the time and really wanted to be with a man who loves hiking, dogs, and the outdoors. And during that first date, she said she felt really bad for Tom number 2 as they had to keep stopping so he could breathe. She was really afraid that he was going to have a heart attack. And even though she wasn't really attracted to him, she decided to keep dating him. So she figured, it's nice to give people a chance. But not long into that relationship, Mary noticed that Tom number 2 pushed the relationship really hard. He got serious super fast. Not long into the relationship, he flew Mary down to a southern city where he wanted to live. He tried hard to convince her that she and the boys should move down there with him and his 5 kids. He was desperate to get remarried. And while they were dating, she noticed that he didn't like it when she spent time with friends. She said he was very possessive. While they were dating, Mary talked to Tom about her own concerns about her career and money. He knew Mary was worried and was figuring out what to do next. So the relationship continued, but Mary knew in her heart it was over. She says, I simply woke up one morning and decided to put on my big girl pants and make the words come out of my mouth. I don't want to date you anymore. But she says she didn't have the kind of courage, so she broke up with him over a text. And he was super pissed. His final words to Mary, I hope you enjoy menopause and minimum wage. So that was the end of Tom number 2, at least physically. Again, she spent a lot of time trying to figure out why she dated a guy she wasn't really attracted to for as long as she did. She never enjoyed having sex with him, and most of the time she felt repelled rather than turned on. So while she reflected on that relationship, she went back on Match.com, and that's where she met Tom number 3. Let's call him the one with the bad back. Tom number 3 also looked great on paper. He had a master's degree in English Lit. He taught at a university about an hour away. He was quick-witted and funny, and he reminded her of her first husband in the nicest way. He also loved music, playing drums, and poetry. And he loved talking about movies, books, and current events during deep conversations in front of the fireplace. But he lacked ambition. He didn't make much money at his teaching job and never tried to move into a better position because he knew he'd be inheriting money when his parents passed away. He never wanted to work too hard and romanticized the idea of being a barista during the summers. Mary says that on one of their early dates at his place, they shared a pizza while standing in his kitchen because he didn't have a table. Well, Mary stood and ate her pizza and he sat on a child's footstool. And she also noticed that his house smelled really bad. Tom number 3 refused to crate his dog, and there was a definite, oh, do dog pee. During their time together, he had 3 back surgeries, and Mary agreed to play nursemaid each time. She even offered to go to the pharmacies to pick up his prescriptions. This Tom also forgot his wallet a lot. And one time when she asked for money to pay for one of his prescriptions, he threw his wallet at her and he yelled, "There, just take it all." As it happened, Tom needed another back surgery. And by then, Mary had already stuck around for the first 2. And she decided she'd had enough of this Tom and didn't want to be anywhere near him after surgery number 3. And once again, the relationship was over physically. She broke up with them, but she spent a lot of time wondering about why she dated a guy who was not ready for adulting. So that was the end of the 3 Toms. So now let's talk about what Mary did after this festival of Toms. What happened before she got her love life do-over? Well, first, Mary quit the job she hated and she bought a local small business that she operates out of her house, and it's doing great. And during that time, Mary continued spending time with girlfriends like me, hiking with her dogs and learning to run her new business. So like I said, Mary hikes with me and her other friends. And one day, a mutual friend brought along a male acquaintance. This mutual friend brought John because she knew he loved hiking and was really into nature and conservation and camping and kayaking and all the good outdoor things. John had a great job, and this mutual friend thought that Mary would like him too. So it was kind of a blind hiking date for Mary and John. I remember it well because I remember the ending. On the ride home, Mary told me that she thought John was a no because she got the impression that their politics and other things were way too far apart. And she thought maybe he was a little too old. But then a group text went out to a bunch of us about going for another hike. And wouldn't you know, the only people available to hike were Mary and John. And that was the beginning of what is now a beautiful romance that started about a year and a half ago. I remember Mary telling me all about their first real date after that hike. She says they chatted for 3 hours and her thoughts about him totally changed. He's a VP at a national financial firm, a former Marine, a father, has a master's degree. He's confident in his own skin, and he's dedicated to healthy eating and exercise. So, like some of the other guys she dated, he looked good on paper. And at the end of that first date, John walked Mary to her car, pressed her up against it, and gave her what she calls the hottest first kiss of her life. And like I said, John looked good on paper. So what is the difference between those other guys who also looked good on paper and John? Well, John is what Mary calls a man with a capital M. In fact, she gushes when she talks about him. For example, she tells me all the time that he brings her coffee every time they meet up for a hike. She also loves traveling with him and loves spending time with him, whether it's running errands, meeting up with friends, listening to podcasts on Sunday morning, cooking, or watching Netflix. And he does things on his own, and he doesn't expect her to bow to his desires. He has things to do in his life and adult male friends to do them with. They each do what they need to do to keep themselves happy. And she loves how committed he is to his job, his spirituality, and his family. She says they communicate well, and that means she's comfortable being brutally honest and talking about things that are awkward or worrisome. And Mary would say they are both committed to making needed changes in their relationship. And he never forgets his wallet. And after a sexless marriage, she is thrilled about what she calls the layers of their sex life. It's passionate. He always tells her that he loves every inch of her and that she's hot. And she said he melts when she does mushy things like taking his hand and holding it against her heart while he's driving. But most importantly, she says that she and John are on the same team. She doesn't feel the tug to give in to what he wants. She doesn't agree with his viewpoint when she doesn't. And like I said, Mary spent a lot of time wondering why she stayed so long with the men she had dated before John. And she realized she'd always picked men she thought she'd be able to get and keep. And that looked like twisting herself into what she thought they wanted her to be. She said she used to spend her time anticipating their every need so that they'd end up needing her. She reflects on what she calls profound insecurity stemming from the shaky relationship she had with her dad. Mary says she was never close to her father and never knew what to say to him. When she was only 11, her father left her and her mom. Then he and his lover traveled the world. She never got to know him and always thought that when she grew up and learned to talk about politics and adult things, he'd finally take an interest in her. So she felt she had to do things to be worthy of his time and attention. Mary said she never felt comfortable with what she calls men with a capital M, men who had their shit together. She never trusted that they would want to be with her. She always ended up with men who were successful, funny, or edgy, but emotionally immature. And oddly enough, she felt some sense of security when she was the emotionally together partner, as if she had the upper hand. And just like Mary, many of us have obstacles standing between where we are now, not really enjoying our love life or not having one at all, and the relationship we want. We often self-diagnose our emotional baggage and assume there's no way out, or we chalk it up to our personality type and think things can't change, or we blame the world of men. We believe there are no good guys out there. But none of that is true. Your love life can change. You can get into a stellar relationship. You can have a do-over. I told you my story in episodes 1 and 2, and you just heard about what happened to Mary. And what Mary and I have in common with other women is that we went from dating debacles to delicious love lives. But Mary and I did it the hard way. Things could have been easier for both of us. Many of those debacles could have been avoided. Yes, finding lasting love is hard for most women. That's because they just haven't learned the skills necessary. There is a happily ever after with your name on it. And the only thing that stands between you and that fantastic relationship is a set of skills you just don't have yet. And the steps to getting the relationship you want will be featured in upcoming episodes. So stay tuned. And like I said, getting to the relationship of your dreams is hard for most women. So if you need help along the way, schedule a chat with me. During the chat, I'll give you an actual diagnosis so you can see exactly where you need to focus. Just head to therebuildingcoach.com to schedule your chat. And quick note, although many of the examples in these episodes are heteronormative, people of all gender identities and sexual orientations are more than welcome. And please, if you like this episode, please like it, review it, subscribe, or share it. That will help others find the help they need too. This is Dawn Ziegler, and this is Love After Divorce.